Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 561 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories. Publishers Weekly says, visceral settings and robust characters will have readers marveling at how much Kirtley is able to fit into a limited page count. For SFF fans with no time to sink into a doorstopper, these concentrated doses of genre goodness will hit the spot. And Kirkus Reviews writes, Kirtley employs sharp, concise prose that complements his puckish sense of humor. The author's passionate voice breathes life into this wonderful array of tales. So again, the book is called Save Me Please and Other Stories, and it's available now on Amazon.com. And our guests today are the husband and wife team of Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson. Amanda is the author of the best-selling memoir Waiting to be Heard, about being falsely accused of murder as a college student living in Italy. She's also a columnist for Westside Seattle and host of the Truth About True Crime podcast. Christopher Robinson is a fellow of the MacDowell Colony Antiado, and his writing has appeared in the Kenyon Review and McSweeney's. He's also the co-author, along with Gavin Covite, of the novels The War of the Encyclopedists and Deliver Us. And in this interview, we'll be discussing Amanda and Christopher's podcast Labyrinths, which features interviews with guests such as LeVar Burton, Brent Spiner, Michael Shermer, and John Ronson, and discussing Christopher's novel Deliver Us, a hilarious take on the future of Amazon's drone delivery program. And now here's our interview with Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson. All right, so we're here with Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let's start off with Amanda and have you tell us, how big of a fantasy and science fiction fan are you?
Oh, huge. Love fantasy, love science fiction. Chris has gotten me more into science fiction. I was more of a fantasy nerd growing up, reading a lot of not just the standard Harry Potter, but a lot of other things as well.
Elaborate.
Elaborate. Okay, fine. I mean, how's the Redwall series for you? Deep cut mice fighting battles.
No, I love those books. Yeah, I actually wrote a short story called Red Road, which is kind of like a takeoff on
an homage.
On the Redwall series.
Very nice. Yeah, I did this really great diorama for a book report project that I did in middle school for one of the Redwall books, and I did this like big red wall of like it was but 4 walls. Like I did the whole. It was 3-dimensional object, and then inside the walls I wrote about what was going on in the book, and it was great. I got an A++ on that assignment.
Yeah, and you were like a Lord of the Rings fan too.
Lord of the Rings fan. Although it was harder for me to read. I read a lot of Ursula K. Le Guin when I was growing up. My stepdad was also a big influence for me in that regard. And also, he had this book that I wasn't allowed to read that was based upon Lord of the Rings, but it was like some fan version of it that was sexually explicit. Do you know what that one is? It's like...
I've never heard of that.
Oh, my God. I'm going to look it up right now.
I mean, there's this National Lampoon's Board of the Rings.
Yes. It was Board of the Rings. Yeah. So I found that in his library, and I was like, what's this? This looks fun. And then he caught me reading it, and I didn't get in trouble, per se, because if I told my mom, he might get in trouble. Yep. So that's my history with that. But my favorite books I've read... Let's see, Chris introduced me to one of my favorite sci-fi books, which is Deepness in the Sky. Mm-hmm. And another book that I read in prison that I loved was The Sparrow. And I only was, as we were chatting about this morning, I only realized now that both of those books, one of the reasons why I really loved them was because they dramatized the problem of language when you're encountering new species and how important it is to be understood or to understand. And both of them do that in a really interesting way. I don't know if you want me to go deep into that. or not?
No. I mean, I'll mention though that we reviewed A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge recently, and so I haven't gotten to Deepness in the Sky yet, but I've heard it's great. I'm really looking forward
amazing.
to doing that as well.
So good, so good.
We won't spoil it then.
Yeah, definitely don't. Well, let's get Chris in here too. So, Chris, kind of what is your background as a fantasy and science fiction fan?
Yeah, I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I was immersed in that kind of fantasy world from a very young age. I think from like third grade, I was playing D&D pretty frequently, and I did a lot of reading as a kid as well. And I think the first time I remember getting chills from a book was reading Lord of the Rings, and I think it was when the Eagles arrived. The Eagles are coming. It's like, oh my
Where
God,
have you been? That's what I want to know. Where have you been this whole time? Just roosting.
Finally.
Roosting.
And, I read a lot of pulp sci-fi. I read, countless Star Wars universe books, that sort of thing. But I also read, the Foundation trilogy and every Asimov I could get my hands on, a lot of Heinlein, a lot of old classic sci-fi. And as I got into high school, I was reading William Gibson, and, there wasn't a ton of like great sci-fi that existed in film world. I mean, there were things like Total Recall, but there's been a huge boom of that in cinema, I would say, in the last 20 years. And so, of course, I've seen basically everything in the Star Trek franchise I'm pretty familiar with.
Mm-hmm. To the extent that, like, it's kind of annoying sometimes. If you get him and another Trekkie in the room, they'll start talking about episodes, like specific.
Yeah.
Like,
Season 5, episode 23.
Season 5, episode 23.
Which is partly why we were really motivated to get LeVar Burton and Brent Spiner onto our podcast, Labyrinths, because we're such huge fans of Next Generation. And, we've got 2 of the cast members now, and who should our third be?
Yeah, we're going to work our way in.
Work our way up to Patrick Stewart.
Well, that's actually how I came across your Labyrinths podcast. I interviewed Brent Spiner a couple of years ago. And so
cool.
As research for that, I listened to your interview with him. And I was like, wow, this is really good. These are obviously, it's funny because there's a part, speaking of, where you ask LeVar Burton, you say, to establish our nerd cred, I want to ask you about, season whatever episode. I have a note here somewhere, but,
I think it was season 5, episode 23, the next phase, or maybe that's episode 25. It was the next phase though. I believe.
Yeah, when Geordi phases out and he has to have Data figure out their friendship brings them back.
It's a Geordi Data friendship episode. It's really moving.
So what was that like, or how did you get set up interviewing LeVar Burton and Brent Spiner?
Well, this is going to sound, I don't know what this is going to sound like. What happens every so often is Chris will see who's following me on Twitter because I never look, but he's like, I wonder who's following you on Twitter. And we noticed that Brent Spiner was following me on Twitter, and I was just flabbergasted. And he was like, you should DM him. You should DM him. And I was like, I could never. And he was like, do it. So I did, and he was so nice and sweet. And then I asked him to, do an interview on Labyrinths, and that just happened to coincide with his new book coming out, and it worked out.
It was the same for LeVar Burton too. I think he was following Amanda on Twitter, and we pitched him on coming on the show, and he was like, I normally don't have time for this kind of thing, but this sounds intriguing, so I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, I think he said, I'm going to take a flyer.
I'm going to take a flyer. Yeah.
Well, because that episode, it was really interesting because you do this sort of like thing with these multiple timelines and how his life could have been different and your lives could have been different. Was that part of your initial pitch, or like where did that idea come from?
No, that just kind of arose after the interview. We were thinking we wanted to do something fun and sci-fi with it. And because over the course of talking to him, we realized that he's had all these different lives. And I often get asked what if questions when it comes to my own life. I thought it would be a fun way to explore that idea. So Chris had some fun with some audio engineering and sound effects.
That was all in post, and we ran that by him. Once we had scripted the episode and we pitched him and said, are you cool with us chopping it up in this way? Because it did require some clever audio editing to create this sort of multiple timelines effect in a podcast interview, which I think maybe we're the only podcast that's ever done that.
Well, we've only done it once, to be fair, because I'm not sure.
It's not really a sustainable model.
Well, just as a podcaster, I'm listening to that. I'm like, oh my God, this must have been so much work. I was really impressed by the level of.
It was a lot of work. It was fun though.
Yeah,
fun work.
I think Chris was using it as an opportunity to play with tools in Adobe Audition, just because you were fiddling.
Yeah, it was also the season finale of our first run of episodes, and I wanted to do something special.
Also, I was wondering, with that episode, at the end, you say, if any music producers out there want to team up with us to actually make a real song called "To Boldly Go," we're all over that. So,
I
see.
Hey.
Yeah,
any music producers?
We'll reiterate that, sure.
Yeah, that'd be fun. We've been doing some music stuff here at home, so that would be super fun.
Do you want to explain about the "To Boldly Go" song?
I think we should work on it together and then go for it, because it could evolve since we last. I mean, it's been ages since we even proposed that, but it was going to be some of me singing and you rapping.
That's right.
Chris was a rapper in a past life or in an alternate dimension.
Yeah.
So it'd be fun. We have yet to come up with a song.
It's a party trick I pull out on occasion these days, but I don't have a lot of time for rapping.
One of his favorite things to do is to put me on the spot and ask me to freestyle rap. And I feel like I stop. The first word that comes to mind whenever he asks me to do that is orange, which you can't rhyme anything with. And I'm just like, gah!
You can. Eminem proved that many times over.
It's true.
Syringe, door hinge, 4-inch.
Do you still remember how the lyrics go to the "Set Your Phasers to Love" song?
No, we don't. It's been a while. We should have looked that up before coming on here. But
fortunately, I have it right here.
Good.
Girl, it's the final frontier. No fear. We could start at Impulse Warp 9 till it's time to set your phasers to love.
God, we're so good. This is genius.
Yeah, they're way, just for our listeners, they're way better than I am. That was just suggestive. Go ahead, Chris.
Some things deserve to be a snippet.
That's its ideal form.
Yeah, I mean, some movies should just be the trailer for the movie.
You know what? Some trailers are super artful, and they sort of give away the whole movie.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, that was a great 2.5 minutes. Don't bother making this.
Says Mr. TikTok brain now? Is it
no,
because
because sometimes an idea, not every idea is worth 2.5 hours or 500 pages of a book.
That's true.
And I've definitely read some books, sci-fi and not, that the premise didn't deserve that much time, and you're just sort of spinning the wheels.
No, I'm totally with you. I watch trailers over and over, like trailers that I like over and over. And there's definitely a lot of movies where I've watched the trailer cumulatively for more time than watching the actual movie.
Ooh, do you have a favorite sci-fi themed music video?
Oh God, could I remember there's a band. I haven't listened to it in a long time. Okay, so one of theirs, they have a music video called Twin Flames. It's like, if I can sing it, is that copyright violation? But it's like twin flames in our hearts as we move toward the very start. If you Google that, it would probably come up. I forget the name of the band.
Twin Flames. Say it again. So Twin Flames.
In our heart, or hearts probably, as we move toward our very start.
Hearts as we move. Okay, let's see if it comes up. The Klaxons?
Klaxons, yeah.
Yeah.
So Twin Flames, and oh God, they had another music video. I can't remember the name of the song now, but it's like in the music video, they're all kind of like floating in outer space with these vaguely lightsaber type things, and these objects sort of float by them, and they like chop them in slow motion, and all the pieces fly toward the camera. It's pretty, and they're all like wrapped in like different colored like ribbons, kind of. They're like naked, wrapped in different colored ribbons. It's pretty epic. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Awesome.
Everyone check that out.
Awesome. trying to think if I can think of one. I was thinking that trailers are awesome, but also music videos are awesome. And I was wondering if there are any sci-fi or fantasy related ones that come to mind. I mean, the Flight of the Conchords, when they do the Lord of the Rings one, is pretty funny.
There's a guy I love named Tom Cardy, who's an Australian comedy musician. Are you aware of him? He's the Australian Flight of the Conchords type guy.
Tom Cardy? Last name Cardy?
Yeah.
Really?
And, he has that businessman song.
Yeah, it's so funny. Oh my God.
But he does a lot of stuff on TikTok as well, which I'm not on TikTok, but I think he posts them to YouTube. And he has an amazing song about Baldur's Gate, another one about Lord of the Rings, where he's describing the plot of Fellowship of the Ring, and it's this conversation where Tolkien is like pitching it to the publisher, and he's like, and then what happens? And then he's like, they walk, they walk, they walk, they walk.
So funny.
So I'll mention too, the other thing I saw that I was like, okay, I got to interview these guys is your proposal. Like on YouTube, I just came across the wedding proposal thing.
Oh man, you didn't even see the wedding, dude.
No, I wasn't. I guess I wasn't invited. But
sorry.
But I guess I'll just explain. So this proposal video, basically, like Amanda is working on like sewing a dress or something.
I'm sewing a wizard cloak as it happens.
Okay. And there's like a sound of something like falling out of the sky outside, and this is all being filmed on a camera or something, or on a phone or something. And so then they go outside, and there's this like glowing meteor that's like struck in the backyard with kind of like mist coming off of it, and there's some like tablet with a message on it. Right? Is that more or less accurate?
Yeah, it was.
It was a data crystal amazing. From the future that had rocketed back in time. And on that data crystal, in the crevice of a smoldering meteorite, it had a fractured partial entry from the Encyclopedia Galactica about the Knox Robinson coalescence, which was the future, union in life together of Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson. So it was a encyclopedia article about us and our life together. And then when when Amanda came and discovered this, I was like, oh, wait, I was thinking about doing this, but I guess it already happened in the future. So I guess I'm doing it now. She didn't know what was happening. She thought maybe I was leading her on a scavenger hunt.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure that what you were doing was what you were doing, because we're notorious for throwing each other little parties or little scavenger hunts that are very narratively developed, and that often use props or costumes. Like for his first birthday that we were together, I teamed up with his brother, and I came up with this whole like secret agent role-playing game.
It was kind of
that was in the future also.
Yeah, it was a cyberpunk themed LARP.
Yeah.
And so like I woke up on my birthday and she was gone. She gave some excuse about
I woke up early and said I had to pick up a friend from the airport.
And I walk into my bathroom to take a shower, and there is this folded up pile of futuristic looking clothes and some cyber shades. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then when I shower, the mirror fogs up, and I can see that someone has written on the mirror just with their finger, "Thanks for the great night, XO Coco." And I'm like, and then I get a phone call from an altered voice that sounds like a artificial, and it identifies itself as the artificial intelligence. And it tells me that I have a mission, Agent Carbon, and that I need to go down to this local coffee shop and meet the Johnson who will deliver me the mission briefing. and this stretches on for a whole day, and Amanda has recruited my friends and family to like play roles in this storyline that she's written.
I've also gone around the neighborhood and at various places left little clues for what he's supposed to do next and who he's supposed to meet.
And she
various
got
coffee
various,
shops. I made fake money
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, so at all of the places where he showed up, I had already paid for what he was supposed to order, and he was just supposed to use these like cyber bucks or something.
and these people, to their credit, they were like down. They're like, if a guy walks in with a, ankle length red leather coat, wearing cyber shades and holding a vibro blade,
Yeah.
I need you to accept his fake money and give him a gargle blaster drink. And in the course of this, my brother and his wife, who are they're in a troupe called the Seattle Knights, and they perform at Renaissance fairs doing jousting and sword fighting.
Yeah, if anyone wants some professional knight action, I highly recommend the Seattle Knights. They are
but they
exceptional.
were dressed up with cyber dreads and lightsabers, and they like hopped out of an alleyway at one point, and they were battling some mercenary goons, and they needed my help, and I got roped into this impromptu battle. And then eventually we figured out that the sort of plot of this story was that there's this new drug flooding the market called Octo. And I had to figure out who this drug kingpin was and take him down. But in order to like find out who he was, I had to like get some information from these Octo dealers that we spotted across the street, who were like looking very obviously shady
and
and
futuristic.
And so like, the rest of Capitol Hill, Seattle, is just going about their Saturday morning, getting a bagel and a coffee, and a handful of us are dressed in crazy future outfits.
So good.
That
And
sounds.
It was epic.
That just sounds amazing. I mean, like, because my wife and I got married in May, and we had, I thought, a pretty like geeky wedding. We got married at the Center for Fiction in New York City. But then I was like reading up on your wedding, and I was like, oh my God, this blows ours out of the water in terms of
the whole escape room aspect of it. Yeah. So back to our wedding. Chris did this whole like futuristic proposal, and then we obviously had to just build upon that for the wedding. So we came up with the idea that sometime in the future, we looked ourselves up in the Encyclopedia Galactica and accidentally broke our timeline, and were sort of trapped in the future in the Encyclopedia Galactica. We stopped existing outside of it.
And it caused all of our friends and family to be scattered throughout space and time.
So the tech support person of the Encyclopedia Galactica was supposed to go back in time in this bubble outside of space and time, and gather together all of our disparate friends and family in order to gather together enough love particles,
Erositons,
and rematerialize us and
restitch our timelines.
Yeah, and fix our timelines.
And so all of our guests were instructed to come dressed from different time periods. And so we had
and it was
ancient Romans,
awesome.
And we had dinosaurs,
and friends covered in eyeballs, and we had 2 Tyrannosaurus Rexes.
I know,
They weren't even human anymore. It was amazing.
Plenty of weird cyberpunky type people. We had 1920s Prohibition era people, and the goal of the evening was kind of like a one act, one night only play that we put on for all of our friends and family. That was kind of like a self-contained Doctor Who episode.
Yeah, there were special effects. Like we had pre-recorded a video of ourselves in the future so that we were talking to ourselves during the ceremony.
And instead of walking down the aisle, we built these futuristic looking canisters that we called the rematerializers, and our friends and family, our family had to come up and give their genetic material to the materializer so that we could be reformed. And then, lights and fog and black lights, and we emerged from these canisters in a puff of smoke.
Looking fabulous.
Choking and
cyber outfits that I made. It was so fun.
So do you know if is your wedding like the geekiest wedding you know of, or like are you part of like social circles where people do this sort of thing, or is this just sort of something that you guys just kind of came up with on your own?
So your brother's wedding was pretty geeky.
My brother,
but again,
he's
in the Ren Fair world, so it was Ren Fair, and I wasn't a part of the story yet.
He had an awesome wedding. It was everyone was there in full regalia. I mean, I was wearing chainmail and plate mail, and
you had shaved your beard to look very old-fashioned.
They walked under a sword arch, and the coolest part was after the after the ceremony, but before the reception, the lead knight from the Seattle Knights, the sort of patriarch of the Knights, abducted my brother's bride and said, if you want to get her back, you're going to have to fight all of us. And he didn't know anything about this. It was all, impromptu. And then he had to fight his way through 6 of the knights in order to reach his wife. And by the time he got to her, the Damien, the other guy, he stepped aside and said, actually, you don't have to fight me. You have to fight her. And then she drew her blade. and at this point, my brother had a stroke of genius, and he laid his blade down on the grass, and he just knelt before her and said,
begged her mercy.
Begged her mercy. And then she headbutted him, drawing blood with the crown that she was wearing.
This is real blood?
Yeah.
This is not part of the...
That was not intentional.
No.
Okay.
She didn't plan to draw blood.
But it's kind of perfectly Layla that she drew blood on her wedding day.
So, super fun wedding. Yeah. I don't know if are aware of a wedding, a sci-fi wedding that's been as crazy as ours.
No, but I keep saying to anybody who will listen that I will happily, we will happily as a team plan your wedding for you if you want to go deep fantasy or sci-fi. We commit is the thing. You want a commitment? Commit to a crazy wedding.
Well, you're speaking to the right audience, so maybe there's some people out there who will take you up on that. I'm curious, Amanda, do you just write these sort of LARP things, or have you ever thought about writing like a science fiction novel or a short story or a screenplay, or have you done anything like that?
I haven't. Chris has done more writing in the screenplay and short story arena. I'm currently working on, it's super in the preliminary stages, but I'm writing a mystery novel that's based on the island where we live. It's not sci-fi. It's more sort of quaint mystery novel. But I think it would be super fun. Chris has a really great idea for a movie, actually, that he would love to make called Inner Space, which, do you want to just give the pitch for Inner Space? It's really good.
Sure. So, the Fermi paradox, there's many potential solutions. Why don't we see aliens, given the size of the universe and the statistics of the number of habitable planets, etc.? You would think intelligent life would be everywhere. And one of the solutions that I happen to like to this paradox is that it is so expensive to travel across the vast distances of space that intelligent civilizations inevitably turn inward, and they explore increasingly complicated and nested virtual realities rather than attempt to build starships and travel and explore the outer space, just because the speed of light limits the ability to do that in a reasonable way. And so the reason you don't see intelligent alien civilizations is because they have sort of burrowed inward and become virtual and artificial. So the premise of this is that, climate change is ravaging the planet, various other catastrophes, and a crew of a sort of billionaire-led last-ditch mission to go colonize a distant planet, Wolf 1061c, takes
That's
off.
The name of the planet.
Yes.
Wolf 1061c.
Yes. It's the third planet of the Wolf 1061 system. And they leave with a, colony with a collection of, fertilized ova, and a crew of, selected for their ability to survive on and terraform a planet.
In an interstellar sort of way, yeah.
But when they arrive on the planet, they failed to predict, they sort of couldn't have predicted that a massive volcanic eruption is happening. And all the magma and ash and everything, all the ash in the air in particular, messes up their landing thrusters and causes them to crash land on the planet. And almost everyone dies, including the billionaire founder of the thing who was, he steps foot on this planet for like 1 minute and then dies. And then they decide, oh, shit, we need to what are we going to do? Our cryopods are broken. We've only got, we obviously don't have the materials we need to successfully build a civilization here anymore. We need plan B. And so they decide that they're going to, they spend a year building a smaller craft out of the wreckage of their first craft that they can fit 2 cryopods in, and they're going to send them back to Earth. And they choose 2 of their group to go back in the cryopods. One of them is a linguist or translator, and the other one is the cryo engineer.
Yeah.
And then a love story ensues over the course of about 100 years. It takes them to travel back to Earth. One of the cryopods breaks, and so on this journey, they have to keep swapping out. They spend a year in the pod while the other one's out of the pod. And because the organs atrophy and get messed up every time you refreeze, they got to minimize they can't trade off every day, basically. And they write letters to each other and record videos, and they slowly fall in love over the course of this long journey as they grow super old. And they arrive back at Earth, and their organs are deteriorating and failing and so forth. And Earth isn't there. It seems like, but then they realize actually it is there. It's just been covered in totally light absorbent solar panels, and it appears black. A little AI.
Although I think that's a little dated now because now they're making clear solar panels, but continue.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little AI probe comes out and introduces them to, Earth 2.0, and humanity is all digital now and welcomes them in to join, to like upload basically. There's a lot more to it. I won't go into it beyond that. But
this is you said this is a screenplay you're working on, or you're just thinking about?
I wrote a screenplay treatment for this, and maybe it's a novel. I've thought about it.
It would also be a good
novel. Yeah.
It's just I can also imagine it just being very beautiful.
The problem is
visually.
it would be one of the most
very
expensive screenplays.
I don't know, though. Like, part of it is just taking place in that damn ship that's going back and forth, and that's actually pretty cheaply made.
Yeah.
It's more the inner space stuff that would be, and what's happening on Wolf.
Yeah.
You know, there was a movie called Inner Space from the 80s. I don't know if you know about that.
No, I actually don't know about that.
Well, damn.
Yeah, what happens in it?
It's a like sort of goofy comedy starring Dennis Quaid and Martin Short, where Dennis Quaid is a really cool, sophisticated test pilot, cocky test pilot guy, and he gets miniaturized a la Fantastic Voyage and implanted inside Martin Short, who's a like neurotic,
got it,
like nerdy guy, and so Dennis Quaid eventually starts he hooks up his pod to Martin Short's synapses and starts like instructing him on how to be more brave and adventurous.
Cute.
And stuff.
Okay, so it's like the Magic School Bus, but like self-help.
Yeah, we reviewed it in the past year or two. I feel like the first like maybe 2/3 is pretty good, and like the last act goes on way too long and gets like really ridiculous. But Martin Short and Dennis Quaid are like amazing, like have amazing like chemistry or like a dynamic together. So, but you might need to change the title. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Blast. What could you name it?
Actually, rules about titles are interesting and complicated.
Oh yeah.
You don't necessarily. I mean, lots of stuff has the same title.
That's true. Yeah, you could just be the new Inner Space.
Yeah.
Move aside,
Reboot.
Martin Short.
Well, actually, I do want to ask you, Christopher, about your novel "Deliver Us," which I just read, which is like fantastic. I just loved it.
Thank you.
But do you want to tell people kind of how did that book come about?
Yeah, that's a book I co-wrote with my friend Gavin, and the premise is that Amazon launches HQ2 in Detroit to beta test their drone delivery program, which amazingly still isn't happening yet. It seemed a few years ago that it was imminent.
Yeah, you predicted the Trump thing, but you did not.
This book came out just before Trump, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny if Trump was president in this book? But it's a book about the intersection of technology and social and economic inequality, and race politics is a huge part of it. Like what happens when technology enters into that equation? Is it a force for good? Is it a force for bad? The answer is it's complicated, but the book kind of plays out as a battle for the soul of Detroit, waged in the hearts and minds of Detroiters by two women, one of whom is the PR executive for Amazon who is kind of tasked with selling the city of Detroit on the idea of Amazon, and another who is a kind of guerrilla social media activist whose grandfather gets arrested after he shoots down a drone over his property. And she wants Amazon the fuck out of there. And they're kind of both battling back and forth to try and claim the narrative.
Hilarity ensues.
It's written in a, I would say, Coen Brothers-y sort of tone, Big Lebowski-ish sort of tone. I wanted the characters in the world to be slightly pitched up from reality. The Jeff Bezos and his S team are characters in the book, and they are, a little bit like the boardroom characters from like Hudsucker Proxy. You've seen
or
that.
the Barbie movie now.
Yeah. And there's a rapper named Goldman Sachs who becomes an influential voice in the anti-Amazon campaigin.
And there's like his raps are in there and his music video, and there's a lot of fun stuff like that. Go ahead.
Oh, well, let me just to give people a sense of like what the tone of the book is like. I just wanted to read two of my favorite lines from the book.
Oh, sure.
Oh, cool.
So when it says, "There were dust bunnies on the rafters below and small stains in the gray fabric of the walls, as if someone had wallpapered the place with the steam cleans upholstery of some college student's old Ford Taurus." That was a evocative image. And then at the ends of the campus, the Amazon Fulfillment Center, a big gray block lined with loading docks, rose out of the earth like a big gray block.
I remember writing that big gray block line. And there's something about the refusal of a beautiful metaphor that perfectly encapsulates the industrial gray block. Like, it doesn't deserve a metaphor.
It reminds me of your friend's poem that ends with something.
Oh, yeah. I had a buddy of mine sent me a poem 10 years ago, and he was trying to finesse the ending of this poem. And I was like, the last line isn't quite right. What it needs is, this, and then something. Like, I could tell just metrically, musically, it needed that. And he had the genius insight to just put the words something as the final words of the poem. It worked great in that
it was
context.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It was reminding me a little bit of in Douglas Adams. He says, it hung in the air in exactly the way that a brick doesn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
A little bit of that kind of.
Oh, I love Douglas Adams. God, let's talk about Douglas Adams. That got me through some rough times in prison. Douglas Adams was one of my go-to. I had the Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that kept me company in a very difficult time when I was in a cell with 5 other people, and one of them was sort of unpredictably violent, and I spent a lot of time just sitting on my bunk, trying to be invisible with my head, like I had earplugs in my ears so I wouldn't have to listen to people screaming, and I just needed some escape, and it was like the perfect escape for me because it was so light, it was so fun, and it was everything I needed in that moment.
Everything your reality wasn't?
Everything my reality wasn't.
Yeah.
I didn't have a towel. That was my problem. Douglas Adams.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I'm a big Douglas Adams fan, given the title of this podcast. And it was interesting, my co-host, John, who I started the podcast with, he's our producer now, he was the co-host, but he had this story about when he was a kid, like he had a stepdad who was really not nice to him. And basically he was grounded like for an entire year or something where, he could go to school, but then otherwise he was basically confined to his room.
Wow. Jesus.
And so he just read like Hitchhiker's Guide, that was like you're saying, that there's just something sort of like both cheerful, but also kind of captures there's something, what's the word? Sort of like existential. It's sort of cheerfully existential.
Totally.
It's sort of perfect for that kind of, getting you through those kind of rough periods.
Yeah, for non-consensual containment.
Non-consensual containment. That's quite the euphemism.
But I wanted to ask you too, Amanda. So in the acknowledgments for Deliver Us, it says that you were basically reading every draft of the book and critiquing it over the shoulders of the authors and everything. So I was just wondering kind of what was your experience on Deliver Us? Well,
I think it's a two-way street because Chris is always looking over my shoulder with everything that I write as well. But yeah, so as he was writing it with Gavin, I was reading everything that they wrote and, giving them insights into when I thought like it was literally just like, this feels long, this feels overexplained, or go into this more, or this is super funny, this is not so funny. I don't really understand this character's motivation. All of those little factors that go into how you write a story. And the thing that Chris does not need help with is just producing content. Like Chris, Chris will just.
I'm very prolific. Yeah.
He's very prolific. He writes very quickly. And sometimes I'm like, my impulse is to tell him to like pull back. Like, you're giving away too much right now. Wait for it to come later. Or you're explaining it too much for the audience. Like, trust that your audience is going to get it. But writing things like it rose out of the ground like a gray block. That's just him being a genius. I have nothing to do with that.
I will say that, with all fiction, I'm a firm believer that empathy is the core of what makes fiction great. That unless you're, writing totally autobiographical fiction, right? Which you're verging on memoir at that point. The goal is to create characters and circumstances and worlds that are different from your own life. And that requires you stepping into the mindset of another human being who is nothing like you. And actually a fun little tidbit about Deliver Us, I actually created D&D style character sheets for all the characters in Deliver Us to try and fully imagine who they were. And I changed, obviously they don't have a move silent skill,
or pick lock.
Pick lock, yeah.
Well, maybe.
But I replaced those with sorts of social skills and things that people in our modern contemporary society would have. So, for instance, for each character, I knew what their flirtation score was, and I knew what their navigate awkwardness score was. Mm-hmm. And I, somewhat arbitrarily assigned those things, but I also, what are the 5 items they have on their person at any given time? Mm-hmm. I knew the answer to that question for every character. And so often in the writing of a scene, you get to a point where what's going to happen next, right? And one thing you learn in fiction writing after you've done it for a while is that story should derive from character. I think that's there are exceptions to this. There's exceptions to every rule, but I think it's a pretty strong rule that the things that happen in the plot need to feel organically derived from who the people are. And if they don't, then the characters don't come across as believable and they feel shoehorned into a plot that has been imposed on them by the authorial presence.
And that's where I come in.
Yeah. And so, imagining who they are, like what's going to happen next in this scene? Well, who is this person? Oh, that's right. They're terrible at navigating awkwardness. So now I kind of know how they're going to react to this. But even so, imagining the lives of these people who are very different from me, some of them are different races from me, different sexualities, different genders. It's very useful to have readers who have real life experience with that. And so the two main protagonists of this book were women. And so it was really, really useful to have a close, consistent female reader to just tell me, am I getting this woman right now? Does she read believably as a woman to you? Mm-hmm. And that was a continual important note that I had to get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could I ask you, so on the cover it says, there's a couple of blurbs and it says, the legal issues alone, ... They didn't even change Jeff Bezos' name, seems foolhardy, and there are just too many inextricably baked in problems of a commercial nature. Are these things that publishers said or agents or something?
Those are things that actual editors said, yes.
At publishing houses when deciding not to publish the book.
Yeah.
They didn't even change Jeff Bezos' name? Yeah. I actually went over to Jeff Bezos' house and threw a copy over his fence
like a freak.
Yeah. I don't think he ever read it. But if you hear this, Jeff, I think you come across well in the book. So
I mean, there's an epigraph in the book from like quote unquote Jeff Bezos where he says, "I know this looks like science fiction. It's not." Do you think of this as a science fiction book or a dystopian book? Or
I don't think of it as dystopian. It is very near future sci-fi in the sense that, you know, things like drone delivery are exploding in the book, which aren't quite here yet. That is a quote from Jeff Bezos. I think he was talking,
it really is?
Yeah.
Wait.
And not about this book, obviously, but he was he was talking about I think he was talking about drone delivery. But or it could have been some other Amazon product. But yeah, that's I guess you could technically call it sci-fi. I think I would call it more of a social novel that has some sci-fi elements.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not dystopian. I don't think I think it's actually quite hopeful for how technology. And I remain hopeful that technology can be a force for good in resolving a lot of our social problems.
Well, and picking Detroit was also like super key to that book. Detroit is its own. It's a whole world that's different than any other part of the United States.
It's also a place that was, you know, the arsenal of democracy. It's like the Jetsons' future is a future that is extrapolated from what Detroit used to be, right? Detroit was the place of the greatest technological innovation in the U.S. for a while. Mm-hmm. And it's not that place now.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Although some things are coming back. But I think the idea that things can fall either way off this tightrope we're on towards utopia or dystopia. And AI is a big part of this conversation as well. And it can go either way, and we need to be really careful to try and steer it so that it goes the way we want it to go.
And we don't just leave human beings high and dry in, you know, cities that they can't, you know, occupy. It's crazy.
You know, I think there are real arguments to be made that even a purely selfish Bezos style capitalist takeover of you know, of Earth until every last person is an Amazon customer, and you know what I mean? Like, that's part of the vision, and there's no employees and they're all robots, right? Like, he's systematically replacing warehouse workers with you know, drones, which of course you would. It makes sense from a business perspective.
Actually, I just got to jump in. This is one of my other favorite parts of the book that I wanted to read. Okay. So it says, in the bedroom of his Lake Washington mansion, Jeff Bezos dreamt of first contact with an alien race, moving lucidly through the treaty negotiations. Even his dreams were under his control, thanks to his LED lucid dream-inducing sleep mask, securing whole new worlds to explore, billions of new customers eager to join Amazon Prime universe.
You know, but a rising tide lifts all boats argument, you know, like I think you can, I don't want to knock Bezos in that vision because
you did a ton of research.
I did a ton of research. I read many books I read everything I could find about Bezos and the workings of Amazon.
For a minor character in this book.
I know. I mean, and I also, you know, spent time in Detroit and met a lot of Detroiters and did a lot of on-the-ground research that way too, so.
No, I mean, that's one of the things I really liked about the book is I was expecting it to be just kind of like Amazon is evil, but I felt like it really presented sort of a balanced view of some of the complexities of the, you know, of the pros and cons of everything.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that ties Amanda and I together is that we don't really believe in evil, and we believe in humans who are complex and flawed and who are many things at once. And I think that about Bezos and about Amazon as well, which is an extrapolation, honestly, of Bezos's mind. He's kind of built that company to be a magnifying lens on his own impulses and wisdom. And the way he even trains people to like operate is meant to just be a sort of force multiplier of Bezos. If he could make clones of himself to just run the company, I think he would. You know?
Well, probably that'll happen sometime in the future. But actually,
Every
That
character
actually-
is Jeff Bezos. Actually, I would love for you to write a book where every character is Jeff Bezos. It's in the warehouse.
But I like what you said about how you guys, you sort of try to see other people's points of view and everything, because that's one of the things one of the other reasons I wanted to talk to you is because, I'm really interested in critical thinking and skepticism and everything. And so it intrigues me that you interviewed people like Michael Shermer and John Ronson and Megan Phelps Roper. And I forget which episode it was, but you talked about these tattoos, these matching tattoos that you have. And I was wondering if you guys could talk about that.
Yeah, so this is our recipe, our 4-part recipe for having a productive conversation.
Yeah, this is on our left inside forearm. It's a set of 4 symbols. They sort of, look like suits in a playing card, like hearts, diamonds, etc. But instead of those symbols,
we have step 1. We can alternate if you want.
Sure.
So step 1 is a Venn diagram. Representing the need to find common ground. So before you enter into a conversation with somebody, especially when you're going to be disagreeing on a topic, the first thing you should do is try to find common ground. Find where you agree. Even if it's, we both don't want to be having this conversation. But ideally, you would have something more in common. And I think that you'd be surprised, even in the most adversarial of relationships, how much you might have in common with your adversary. Step 2?
Step 2 is a knight's helmet, which represents steel manning, which is the opposite of straw manning. So instead of, picking apart the weakest version of your opponent's position, you need to address the strongest version of their position, such that the rubric we always go by is such that the other person would say, after you summarize their position, wow, that's exactly what I believe. Thank you for articulating it so well. I wish I'd thought of saying it that way. Right? That's the goal.
Step number 3 is a heart, and that is for having compassion. You have compassion for how your adversary or your conversation partner might have arrived at their conclusions, even if you don't agree with them. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
And the last symbol is the delta symbol, which represents change in mathematics, physics. And that is because you need to be willing to change. If you enter into a difficult conversation unwilling to change your own beliefs, you really shouldn't expect whoever you're talking to be willing to change theirs either. And it might be the case that you're the one who's wrong. You have to accept that possibility. So, that set of steps is a reminder to ourselves. And it comes up, honestly, in our marriage all the time, even. Just, like find common ground. Okay, we're disagreeing about some childcare. What are we going to do with our infant son? And do we sleep train him this way or that way?
This is very pertinent because we are in the middle of that.
Yeah. And it's like, well, common ground, we both really value and care about our son, right? Let's just reestablish that fact. We have the same goal here, which is to love and support our son, Okay, you think we should do sleep training this way? I think we should do it that way. Like, let me truly grapple with all the best arguments for your position.
And vice versa.
Yeah, right. And have compassion not only for how they may have arrived or what is informing their perspective,
but also your own.
And compassion for yourself too, because it sucks to be wrong.
Sucks so hard.
It's really hard to be wrong.
It also sucks to be in an argument with someone that you care about. Like, that sucks.
So, this has been useful to us in our jobs. Whenever we interview people on Labyrinths, we're not always talking to people we agree with, and we're often having difficult and complicated conversations. Not with Brent Spiner or LeVar Burton. Those happen to be pretty light and fun.
Easy breezy, yeah.
But we've talked to people who have political viewpoints or who represent ideologies that don't align with our own. And especially in those kinds of conversations, this is really useful.
Yeah, and it's sort of building upon something that I came away with just from prison. Like, I lived alongside people who had committed heinous crimes. Like, one of my cellmates for a while there was someone who had murdered her own kid. So it's like, if I can live with people who murdered their own kids, then I can talk to anyone. you know?
Yeah. So was this sort of skepticism kind of, what would you call it? Sort of, oh God, there's a particular phrase I'm struggling to come up with here. Epistemic humility, the sort of epistemic humility approach. Is this something that you were both interested for a long time, or did you influence each other? Or was there a particular progression of how you got interested in these sorts of ideas?
I mean, these sorts of ideas I became interested in when I was going through all the insanity in Italy, because I intuitively understood that everyone who was, putting me through this horrific experience was not necessarily an evil person, that there were a lot of people out there who felt like they were justified in calling me a monster or justified in putting me in prison, even though they were wrong. And I became interested in that problem of how do you talk to or deal with people who are hurting either you or someone else, but believe that they are justified in doing so. And how do you have difficult conversations when somebody has written off your humanity? That's just like a problem that I've had in my life that I've had to figure out what to do with.
I came at that much more philosophically. I studied philosophy of mind a lot. I'm very well read on that subject. And I've thought a lot about nature of consciousness and knowledge and things like that. So, going to like Thomas Kuhn's justified true belief, how do you really know that you know something? And what does it mean to know something? And it's a very abstract philosophical entry point to the questions that Amanda faced
on a very pragmatic way
and visceral way.
Yeah.
But I think we both ended up arriving at epistemic humility and skepticism. On our other wrist, incidentally, is another tattoo we both have, which is the resistor symbol, which for us represents
being mindful of
epistemic humility, honestly.
Yeah, like being mindful of what information we let in to influence our thinking, be mindful of what we let out into the world.
Yeah, we don't want to just be an easy conduit for information without vetting it, or opinion or idea, etc. So what comes in, we don't just want to be spitting back out. And that's our skepticism filter, basically. Apply a skeptical mindset. And we're both atheists. I think we arrived at those conclusions also in different ways. But we're now sort of aligned in that space. And we're both deeply interested in how the mind works. And again, from my interest in consciousness and cognitive science, I wound up being really curious about cognitive bias. And Amanda, as a victim of...
It's just very relevant to my life.
Vicious cognitive bias. We did one episode of Labyrinths with this guy, E.T.L. Dror, who is one of the world's leading experts on cognitive bias, especially as it affects forensic science, which is super interesting. Because a lot of people think things like fingerprinting is just a pretty cut and dry science. A print either matches or it doesn't. But in fact, it's much more of an art, as is DNA comparison and analysis, another thing people tend to think of as just a cut and dry science. And Dror has shown through some very clever study designs that these people are extremely subject to the various cognitive biases that afflict us all, such that if they're told extraneous information like that a suspect confessed, they will often change their
scientific opinion,
and say, oh, well, actually, this print does match, when before they thought it didn't. And that's very troubling because you would hope that sort of information does not affect a analyst's opinion of whether or not a blood splatter pattern matches or is consistent with, the scenario presented.
Yeah, I have his name on my list of episodes to talk about, but I wasn't sure I would be able to pronounce it correctly, so I just sort of skipped over it when I was reading the names there. But no, I would definitely recommend to everyone listen to that episode because it was really disconcerting, the stuff he was saying about the imperfectness of forensic science or the biases that can affect it.
And it's not that the forensic scientists are notably, biased. It's that they're just human, and we're all biased.
We're all biased by things like that.
And when you have a job like determining whether or not someone is a murderer, if you're a prosecutor or a judge or a forensic scientist, I think the burden to counteract your own cognitive biases is higher. And the expectation that the people who fulfill those roles need to be working a lot harder to pay attention to and notice their biases.
And that's something that they have resisted acknowledging to this day.
All right, so we're pretty much out of time. I guess maybe just to wrap things up, I'll just ask you if you have any upcoming projects you want to talk about. So like Chris, in some article I read, it said that you're working on a nonfiction book about evolution, the future, and psychedelics. Is that still going on? Or?
I am still working on that book slowly. Yeah, it's it's about insights I've gained from both psychedelics and a lot of time spent meditating about how to live in the present moment, but also about how evolution has basically built us to do anything but that. Because survival is correlated not just with having a good predictive model of the world around you, but the further the further an organism can predict what's next, basically, the higher its chances of survival. And so we are all driven to be little prediction machines and to be continually living 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes from now. And I wanted to sort of explore that story as it applies to all life and what it means to be an entity that is kind of living in the future perpetually. And of course, the entities that are coming after us, like artificial intelligence, they will be living and operating on timescales that dwarf our own. And, what does it mean to be planning for a future 10,000 or 100,000 years from now? How does that affect the decisions you make? And what does it mean for a little protoflagellum, a little cyanobacteria or something to anticipate its own future? Because there is a way of talking about that as well that is coherent on another very different time scale. So yeah, I'm plugging away at that slowly.
Yeah, and it sounds really cool. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it whenever it's ready. And then Amanda, is there any upcoming projects that you want to mention?
I do have upcoming projects, but I don't know if I'm allowed to mention them. Stay tuned for early next year, I guess. Yeah,
early next year, there'll be some big things happening. And I think what you can say is the waking up thing just came out.
Oh, yeah,
recently.
That's right. Very recently, I wrote and delivered this series of meditative talks on the subject of resilience for Sam Harris's Waking Up app. Which you can find in the Life section if you're a subscriber. And it's our favorite meditation app, so I recommend it if you don't already meditate.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I just listened to your interview with Sam Harris, which I thought was really good. So if people haven't listened to that, they should go check that out as well.
Yeah. So that's
all right, do you have... Okay, cool. So do you have any other final thoughts or anything, or... any final words?
I'm just very grateful for how deep cut you went with us. That was super fun. And yeah, again, we'll plan your wedding for you. It's not just crazy; it is moving as well. We did very good vows. They were very fun.
Yes,
made everyone cry.
Yeah,
I won't say I'm sorry. I got married already. But if I had known that you guys were available,
you got to have heart. It's not enough to have cool sci-fi ideas. You
got to have heart.
Got to have heart.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we'll wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Amanda Knox and Christopher Robinson for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.